This week, we stare into the true face of evil.
And I find out that Japan is just as interesting when it's set in Germany.
Hi, I'm Kyle.
And I'm Garrett.
And we watch anime. Garrett, this week we touch upon a hard-to-come-by anime. This is a show with no swords, anime breasts, and frankly, no Japan. This is a story that can be told just as good in an animated format or a live-action Netflix show for its gritty realism, intricate storytelling, and themes. We're going to find out what truly constitutes anime when all of the normal tropes are taken out. And what is left behind is something truly to behold. That's right, this week we tackled the realistic, morality drama-based thriller known as Monster. But before we begin, Garrett, what are new fans going to be expecting from this show?
I would say Grey's Anatomy Special Victims Unit.
I forgot the woman who's been like SVU for like years, but like we'll just say I would love it if there was an anime like Ice-T in there.
With Mariska Hargitay.
That's it, Mariska Hargitay. It's like,
yeah. Christopher Maloney shows up.
Yeah. So this week we are going to be talking about the show Monster. Just to kind of give you some background of what the show was about beforehand is that the manga came out in 1994 and ran all the way to 2001. So this was like a long time.
Oh, see, I thought the show was intentionally dating itself.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that it came from that period.
Right, and not only did it come from that period, well, I mean, it came from it's set like 10 years back, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's like a long serial of a show as opposed to like normal anime, which is like, flash and action.
And 94 to 01, so like a 6-7 year run.
Yes, okay. And the anime came out in 2002, so the anime is not bad for its time, honestly.
I gotta be honest with you, it's so dark, so early, that I don't know how you sustain 7 years of this darkness.
It is a very like brown, gray, black. It's like it's shades of like just dark colors are pretty obvious in the show. So the one thing about this show is that the only thing that's Japanese about it is the main character. The subs of the show basically implies that German is being spoken throughout this show, but like to the Japanese listener, we're saying it as if it's Japanese.
Right.
The show's interesting that it's set in the mid-1980s for the most part in Germany, with some parts taking place in Czech Republic, and you could tell this based on clues. First off, someone had like one of those like giant phones in their car. I think it was Tenma himself who actually had like a legit landline that you actually like picked up and put down in the armrest of the car.
I was actually talking about car phones with my brother the other day, and he was saying that they were way better than cell phones. And I was like,
you're talking about the sat phones specifically,
I was like, how is that possible? He goes, well, think about it, because when you have a cell phone and you're putting it next to your ear, they can only amplify the signal so much without frying your brain.
Right.
However, in a car phone, if it was in the trunk or under the hood, it could be relative to a cell phone, a massive amplifier of signal. So you could get like really crisp service because of the ability to make the unit that much larger. So.
Right, exactly. And the other clue that indicates the age of it is that there is an actual East and West Germany still.
Oh, yes, that was the first clue. When they said he's visiting from East Germany, I was like, come again now?
Yeah, you're like, what was that again? Yeah, no, it implies because it wasn't until Gorbachev took down this wall in the 1989 when there were still two Germanys at that point, which people don't realize.
Damn that war.
Yes. This show is also like very much like a Don Quixote style in that it's got multiple narrators, and it shows pretty much what happens.
There's narrators?
Yes. Weirdly enough, it's going to be interesting to discuss this show, and I feel like our show, weirdly enough, is the perfect format to talk about this show.
Of course.
Because normally we do 4 to 6 episodes running through, right? That's usually because I feel like that gives you an idea for what to get out of it.
Mhm.
Monster literally takes 4 episodes to get through like the first introductory arc. Like the main theme of the show is the
Yep.
first 4 episodes, and then there's another 70 episodes after that, which is
Yeah.
completely different than what you watched in the beginning. So I guess the real question we're going to be asking this week is, as a new fan, someone who had no idea what the show is about,
Mhm.
learning about that first 4 parts and the 2 episodes after that we had you watch, was it enough to keep your interest?
Oh yeah.
And for me as an anime fan, we hear Monster as this kind of like legendary show that you have to watch as a fan.
Hmm.
But the problem is that it's not in like the top recommendations on most people. But if you go to like all the websites, it's like the darling, this like critically acclaimed thing. And the reason is it's a long, slow, non-anime like anime. It's more of like a Netflix show than anything. It's like
if you dig slow burns,
yeah.
right.
This is like the slowest of burns. I remember I was watching it this week, and I thought to myself, like by episode 5 and 6, I was like, I hope Garrett's not bored, because like it's slow burning this
Yep.
theme of like, who is Nina, who is like,
Mhm.
and I'm like, it's probably gonna be pretty obvious to most people at this point, so there's no reason to stretch it out. But yeah, it tells multiple stories after like the groundwork's laid out. So once again,
Admittedly, you know that I appreciate slow burn. I like things that don't move. There is such a thing as too slow.
yeah,
The first 4 episodes were paced very methodically.
right,
But I must admit, due to time constraints, I watched episodes 5 and 6 on YouTube, and this is my favorite thing to do. Is when you assign me things and it's on YouTube and I'm running out of time, I put it at 2x speed.
oh yeah, and it was still relatively slow at that point.
So there's a moment when Dr. Tenma is like running up steps and it's like, and it's making like,
Yeah, it's like it's like a Quicksilver from the X-Men movies, just like face rippling up the stairs.
like,
honestly, like I still think even if you watched it 1.5, even 2 times, it's still a slowly paced show. So that's one thing to note, is that
right, because I could still read it and understand.
right,
what's going
you
on.
have to literally dig in for this show. But let's talk about it now, right? The show is called Monster. It sounds ominous. It's actually got a different take, and we'll get into more of the themes on the show later. But like, let's talk about the main topic of the show, specifically the main central character,
Right.
Dr. Kenzo Tenma.
Mhm.
So what's his deal, Garrett?
Dr. Kenzo Tenma is a young, successful surgeon at the Eisler Institute, or Eisler Hospital.
Yes.
And he's got everything going for him. He has the skill, the position. He's dating the director of the hospital's daughter. He's actually engaged to her. She's absolutely beautiful. His career path is got a rocket ship strapped to it, and he is just headed for the moon until it's not.
Right.
And he has a situation where a opera singer is brought in for an operation,
right,
and he successfully performs the operation, and there's a lot of great press, and the director of the hospital, his future father-in-law, holds a press conference and takes credit, but he doesn't really care because he's not in it for the glory. You know, he wants to help people.
And frankly, he is like literally the only one that can do things. If there's a very serious surgery that needs to happen, if it isn't Tenma, you gonna die. Like, that's literally the idea of this show.
If Dr. Becker came in the room,
it's like that guy from Scrubs that was like, those constantly.
Not the Todd, right?
The Todd, yeah. Like Dr. Becker is like the.
He's like if George Costanza was the Todd.
Except not attractive, not in good shape. Like, it was like every time, because the one time I remember Dr. Tenma goes, "Who's doing the kid's surgery?" And he's like, "Dr. Becker." And he's like, ugh! Like, he actually gave like a funny face of like, "Oh no, that's your death sentence."
Right. So Dr. Tenma is accosted in the waiting area in the following days by this woman who's a Turkish immigrant, and she's saying, "My husband was here first. Why didn't you save him? You're the best. Why didn't you save him?" And as it turns out, is he was actually supposed to perform surgery on that patient, but they pulled him off for the opera singer. And as the sort of like, as the petals start to get pulled away from the flower, he realizes, much like everyone in America now realizes, that healthcare is a business.
Yeah.
And the director of the hospital pulled him off of that surgery for the more high profile case. And damn the immigrant. And there's this moment when he's out to dinner, and after he's made this realization, he's out to dinner with his fiance. And she, while she's like chewing on her Chateaubriand, is like, well, you know, not every life is equal.
And you know what the funny thing about her is, Ava, the like fiance. My favorite part about her is like, I knew, like, if there was an anime version of RBF, like she has it, like she perpetually has like the eyebrows that look like, you know, malevolent, and her lips look like a V, just like.
So I don't know if you remember this because it was a tiny portion of the movie. Right. In the first half of American Psycho, Christian Bale is out to lunch with his fiance, played by Reese Witherspoon, and she is such a society hobnobbing lack of personality, and he's trying to break up with her and say it's not going to work anymore, and it's just like it's hitting her there, and it's because you know, she is a society person, and that's what matters to her, and so this is starting to like really eat at Tenma, and he's at the hospital later on, a few weeks later, and he's presented with another surgery. There is a diplomat from East Germany. So again, set in 84, 86, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in that area.
There's a diplomat from East Germany who came with his wife and 2 kids to West Germany. And there's been an awful crime in the home, and the parents are dead. The boy has been shot in the head, and the daughter has witnessed it all. So she is suffering, as the show calls it, from a severe case of mental shock, which, I mean, WebMD could totally diagnose you with that. But he's going to remove the bullet from this brain. And as he's about to, he's pulled off because the mayor of the city that they're in has suffered a stroke or a heart attack. I think it's a stroke.
And, something in the brain.
Right, something in the brain, because he's a neurosurgeon.
And I know this, Garrett, not that I'm like chief neurosurgeon, but everybody who ever is a patient of Dr. Tenma has a wrap around their head. So I'm just assuming that he does brain surgery. It's just, if you're a patient of Dr. Tenma, you're going to end up with like a wrap turban at the end of this thing.
Right.
It's kind of like getting a lollipop at the dentist. I don't know. It's like one of those things.
So Dr. Tenma gets pulled off to do this mayor's surgery, but he has this existential crisis where he's like, no, like this other, even though this is the child of a diplomat, which is also super important.
Yes.
He's like, I need to take this. This was here first. This is my stand. I'm stepping, away. And so he saves the child's life. But in the process, the mayor of the town dies. And instead of everyone recognizing that it was a no-win situation, they blame him. He's an independent thinker. He broke up the team. He put everyone on their heels. And because of this, they try and pretend like it's going to be okay. Oh, it's fine. You made the call you had to make. But they strip him of his job and make him just like make him like an on-call doctor.
Right.
His fiance gives him back his engagement ring, or more appropriately, she drops it on the ground outside of a fancy ballroom.
Right.
And, his life in that moment unravels when the director of the hospital is telling him,
mind you, this is the guy that like took him in from Japan, like this young budding Japanese, citizen, and made him what he is really. And he pretty much breaks Tenma's heart and is like, by the way, if you want to, you can stay here and work if you want. So basically any chance of advancement is gone. Like he's saying your life as a doctor is essentially over, which is just not the best thing.
And that's kind of F up of a doctor. Dr. Becker keeps trying to say to him, hey man, it's just politics. It's politics.
I was in your shoes once. I'm like, what did you, Dr. Becker? What did you do? So I'm pretty sure you probably gave someone like a fart muffin at some point while you were doing this surgery. I actually had a moral conundrum. So
he puts like whoopee cushions under his hands. Like
he's like, don't whip me in with your ass. So
everyone thought that this would crush him, but in a way he found it kind of liberating, because
he said like this, I became a doctor again.
Yeah. Gone was the need to do things to impress people. You just did it because a doctor's goal is to save lives.
Right. But there was a moment of weakness for him, and this is important, is that he was sitting next to the child that he had saved. Johann Liebert. And he was just pounding on his knees, just like in a moment of frustration, going like, no, it's not true. All life is equal. All life is equal. People like that are just better off dead. And he just went off on his way, but then ended up being okay, just being okay.
Except when he leaves the room, Johann regains consciousness and has the creepiest death eyes you've ever seen.
So obviously, we'll get into it before, but let's put a pin in it because I have a question to ask you at some point.
All right.
About like how long it took you to figure out who the monster was, but essentially, and then on top of that, the guy that like is kind of a suck up takes over the chief position, and they go to this kid's room who is like unconscious, and he gets all these gifts because he's a kid, he got shot, and they want him to survive, and all these Germans gave him treats and candies and all this stuff. He can't eat them, and like the director is like literally opening them up and just like, oh no, he doesn't need these. Oh no, like
and then when he offers it to the two other doctors,
yes,
I know they're just trying to appease their boss, but the gusto with which they grabbed candy from an unconscious child was
like insane. Like they're like this kid's
they're bad people.
Yes. And not only that, but they're like Werther's originals. So I don't know how they look like they're like hard candies.
Not
punching on
Werther's originals.
Yes. Or whatever German version of Werther's original.
Growing up out there, kids, if your grandma or grandpa did not have, or grandma more specifically, did not have Werther's original in her purse, your life is less rich. Furthermore, the only thing that could possibly substitute is those strawberry candies in the wrapper that looks like
a strawberry. They honestly, my grandma would do like a Christmas thing with cookies and stuff like that, but to like decorate, she used those candies, so they'd always be like the last thing anybody ate, so there'd be like cookie crumbs all over the wrapper, and like it's just like the grossest thing. And you're like, I'm a kid, I'm addicted to sugar, I'll do it.
my paternal grandma would put out 2 snacks at Christmas time that were never in the house any other time. One of them was a dish that had Andes mince. And the other one was and no other time did anyone in my family ever had this, but for the holidays she would put out like a little bit at a time, because remember, these are like Depression era people, so like you do not get to be gluttonous. You take your 2 or 3 pieces of or whatever. They would put out honey roasted peanuts from Planters.
Oh yeah.
And I specifically remember every time I'd go to like bite them, my grandma would go, now remember to chew them well so you don't get a tummy ache. Okay, Grandma. Anyway,
but these amazing doctors of their profession, cavities or some tummy ache be damned, just rip over the kid's candy, just like, And so basically, like, and another thing is that the girl who's in shock, she is speaking, but basically only 2 words, which is kill him, kill, and she's walking through the hospital doing that too. She's like, kill him. So my assumption would be she's the monster. She's creepy as hell. Get that girl into a cage. I don't care.
Right. So that was my first thought, was that she was the one that she went into some sort of transcendental state or whatever, and she was the one who committed the crime against her family. That was my initial guess.
Right. And so Tenma's on his ropes, but he's kind of doing okay. He's fine being an on-call doctor. He respects the work that he does. But then, lo and behold, there is now the chief of neurosurgery. The guy took his job.
Dr. Boyer.
The head doctor on call. So he's like the guy that decides who goes where. And the director of the hospital, so the head administrator.
His former father-in-law.
All dead. So just right there, Tenma looks sus. He legit looks sus.
Yep.
His alibi is, I was drinking. Like, I was getting soused at the time of the crime.
But it was a good alibi. It must have been a good alibi because they didn't investigate any charges against him because he was seen places.
Yes, being a real soused guy. Yeah.
And then they send a man who's having hand spasms.
So this is a guy. So this is another character you need to know. His name is Detective Lunge, and he speaks with a very deep voice.
If he's not an Asian caricature, posing around as like a German. I don't know.
Are you telling me that he goes to Dr. Tenma and he's like, I'm going to be culturally competent?
Yes, yes, yes.
That's what you assume, Detective
He's like
Lungay.
Charlie Chan. Like,
and he has this like quip in which he says his brain is a computer, but it's not so much like Sherlock Holmes going into his mental library. It's a legit like, I have to use Windows OS X in my hands, have to actually type out the command keys to get the whatever information I had from someone. Like,
and that's how he accesses it later, the keystrokes.
So like someone's talking, he's like,
but he's doing it at like
near his leg,
side, near his hip. So you're like, are you fiending for something?
Here's the thing. Yeah, if I saw someone making those hand gestures while they were talking to me, I'm going to assume he's going to punch me. Like
or he's casting a spell. Right.
I'm assuming this man wants to throw hands, and I better put my dukes up because this guy's nut. But yeah, so Detective Lungay has his suspicions, but honestly, Tenma's okay because he's got an alibi, and also like, you know, there's nothing really to pin him to it. It was poison candy, so that makes him feel a little bit there's got to be a doctor because the doctor would know what to do there.
Right, and the initial thought is that it's political terrorism, particularly, right. and that would be especially, they would definitely lead
in West Germany. It would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
pre-fall of communism.
Yes, and East Germany was doing it's kind of like Pakistan and India. Like they don't necessarily fight each other; they're just like poking each other with very large sticks for like decades, essentially. So now we're going to get to the idea of the show. What happens after that is 9 years pass. Dr. Tenma is now.
Oh no, not quite. We almost skipped over a super important part.
What?
Where the twins disappear.
Oh, yeah, the twins disappear. Yeah, that's right. So, and she did not want to see her brother either. So that was another little bit of a hint. But then, so 9 years later, now we are actually in 9 years later. We do the...
And that's when we see the phone in the car.
Yes. And so we get to Dr. Tenma's now... I'm going to say he's chief now. I'm not going to say he's like really high, but at least he's got like his old position back because they need.
He's chief of surgery, but which was kind of the fallout of what happened was this new director came in and was like, I only care about skill and whatnot. Yeah. So you're chief of surgery. So that's where he stands 9 years later, and they kind of believe he's on the track to become chief of the hospital.
And Ava, the daughter of his old fiance, wants to get back with him, but he's like, not today, babe. Not today. So she's like, come back to me, Tenma.
I want to start over.
I have a sad V-mail. So, so 9 years later, and a new case shows up. So another batch of young families are being killed. Mm-hmm. And they're finding out that the families are being killed by more than one person. So there's got to be a lock expert. There's got to be someone who's good with the knife. It's got to be someone who's good at robbing and dealing with burglaries and planning this stuff.
Everyone who dies, so it's middle-aged. I think they describe them as middle-aged couples.
With kids.
Without kids.
Without kids, okay.
Without kids. And what's interesting about it and why they believe there has to be more than one person is these people are dying without struggle.
Right.
So if one person were to kill two people, unless they planned it perfectly every single time, you're going to be discovered while committing the act of one or something else.
Right.
So they sort of narrow it down to this one. I think his last name was Boxler.
Yeah, Boxler, and he's a locksmith. Like he's actually like he's good at breaking into things. He's a guy that's good at breaking into houses. So he think he's a prime suspect, but they find that he's injured, unconscious, or
he gets hit by a car as he's running, and he's running with like great fear. Like his life was dependent on it. And so he ends up in Dr. Tenma's hospital. Dr. Tenma saves him.
Dr. Tenma saves him because he's a pro. Luckily, he didn't get Becker on his call sheet. And so he's recovering. And the Lungay's like, hey, I need you to keep this guy alive because he's a prime suspect in this.
Can you keep him alive?
He's like, can you keep him alive? And he should be, there's this character in I don't know if you watched the new kind of like Simpsons-based show called Disenchanted.
No.
It's pretty funny, but there's this one guy called McFeely, and he's like the guy that's stuck in like the shackles in the dungeon, and all he does is go like, and like that's what I thought about with Lunge. And so he survives, and he's like, what's going on, or how you feeling? He cares about his safety, and the guy's like, man, I really wish that I didn't get into this life. I remember as a kid I was really poor, and I wanted this clock, and it was the one where Nutcracker comes out, and that's all I wanted. And I broke into my first house because I did it. And if only I had that clock without any issues, I would have not gone to the life that I did. And so Tenma, being kind of the swellest guy in the world, just pure swell guy, goes out, grabs him the clock, and tries to come back.
Well, so quick aside, Tenma is on a stroll through the city with Dr. Becker, who is so lecherous and is trying to set him up with the daughter of the diplomat. And Tenma's like, I hope she's nice. And Dr. Becker's like, she's a real hottie.
It's that friend you really don't want to keep around after a certain amount of time.
And so he sees this, as you said, he sees this Nutcracker clock in a shop window, and he grabs it and he has it wrapped. And he says, screw this date. I'm going to go give this to my patient.
Right. And so he comes back, and the cop who's guarding him is dead. He long dead.
And the only thing next to him is a candy wrapper.
It's a candy wrapper. Oh.
The Candyman can.
And so he sees that he's in the a parking garage, and he gets to it, and he's like, what happened? Come back, you're injured, all that stuff. And he goes, get away from here. The monster is here. The monster is here. Get away. He's going to hurt you too. What happens then, Garrett?
So the monster addresses him, and he's a little shocked. And the monster is in the shadows, and he begins what all villains do, which is monologue.
Right.
And he proceeds to reveal to Dr. Tenma that Dr. Tenma knows him. In fact, he doesn't just know him, he knows him very well. And immediately, Tenma picks up on it, and he goes, Johan. And he realizes that this is the little boy who was shot in the head 9 years ago. And he's now, come back full circle. And he starts talking, Johan does. And he says, Johan, I was known by that name at one time. And he starts monologuing about killing people. And Boxler, the lockpick, is on the ground, and he starts confessing. He's like, it was him. He hired us. It was me and Bruiser Brody, or Big Bruiser, or whatever his name was.
And they're also dead.
They're dead. He killed the crew. He hired us to kill these people. He wouldn't hesitate to kill, and he wouldn't bat an eyelash. And right in front of the Dr. Tenma, he pulls the trigger and executes Boxler.
And he has such confidence that Tenma is not going to do anything about it, that he just walks by him. And he says...
Right. He could shoot a man on Fifth Avenue, and they would vote for him. And so he begins to walk by him, and there's this moment, this big reveal, and you're wondering, is he going to be deformed? I mean, it looked like a really neat bullet hole, which was very funny because he got shot in the head, and they just had this little dot as a bullet hole.
Yeah.
The likely damage that the front of his skull was crushed.
Also, this is 1980, so bullets couldn't have been that great.
Well, especially in East-West Germany.
Right, exactly.
But when his face is revealed, it's as if a member of BTS was German.
It does. He has the BTS hair. He really does that. You kind of imagine Jonathan Taylor Thomas, but shorter and more bowl cutty.
He is a pretty Aryan. Is the best way to describe it.
Right. So here's the main conundrum. Now, Tenma has made a decision a long time ago, which basically has consequences for the rest of the story. He saved the devil, and now he kind of lives with that thought alone. But so this kind of gets us into the idea of what the conundrum of the show is.
Right. And might I just add, I I glossed over this, and I apologize. You talk about saving the devil, because in his monologuing, Johan reveals that he was the one
Mm-hmm.
who poisoned the candy,
Mm-hmm.
that killed the doctors and the head of the hospital. And Tenma says, why? And he says, you saved my life. I owed it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you wished it. And Tenma has that flashback to that moment of weakness you spoke
Mm-hmm.
about, where he was sitting
Mm-hmm.
next to the bed and he was like, people like that deserve to die. Well, your wish was Johan's command.
Right, exactly. So Johan's a really interesting serial killer character. He basically saved the devil, but this is kind of like the conundrum is essentially the trolley problem. And I don't know if have you heard about the trolley problem before, Garrett?
Oh, you mean there's people laying in front of a trolley, and if you save them, someone else will also die?
Yeah, so yeah, it's basically there's a train track and a trolley is running full speed down the track. On the track that is ahead of them is 5 people tied to the track.
Mm-hmm.
You are the only person that can really do anything about it. You have a switch that allow you to change the track before the trolley hits the 5 people. But on the area that you changed it to, there's one person there. So the trolley choice is, would you choose the one person dead to save the 5?
That's sort of what I thought it was. And I should feel worse about that because I've watched The Good Place like 4 times through, and that's like a central thesis of that show, is the trolley problem.
And what happens is that Tenma made that trolley problem choice, but he had incomplete information. He did not know that in the process of having a moral decision, that it's not just that you're saving one life, but you're saving basically what's essentially a massive serial killer / the second coming of Hitler.
Right.
Would you do that? So that is the question.
In hindsight, had Hitler gotten into art school?
Right. It's that kind of thing, right? So I think the question for you, Garrett, is if you were Tenma, before knowing that Johan was a killer, would you make the same decision Tenma did? And had you known after the fact, would you have made the same decision that Tenma did?
Beforehand, I might have, because if I was feeling especially righteous about the situation and wanting to make a stand at the hospital, at the same time, you're supposed to trust your colleagues and you're supposed to believe that even though Dr. Becker might be a loser, that anyone at the hospital can complete the task. You know,
or should be able to, right? Yeah.
But then again, like surgeons, as we've seen as they're portrayed in Scrubs, also have like massive egos, so it's tough to believe that anyone could do what you could do.
Yeah.
Afterwards, oh yeah, you definitely feel bad. I mean, like you would have let that kid die,
right? And I think that's the main guilt. So some of the themes of the show are guilt and choices and consequences and what is true evil. And so the rest of the story that we won't go over into 5 and 6, but generally the idea of the story goes is that Tenma ends up becoming a fugitive because now people are dying next to him and it's becoming more coincidental that people are dying around him and that he's the main benefactor of it. And now, so Tenma spends the rest of the series scouring the world for Johan. And there's many, many stories that are told under that are affected by Johan being alive, basically.
This is the fugitive.
Yeah.
He's Richard Kimball, and he's looking for the one-armed man.
One-armed man. It wasn't me. Now, and anytime I hear that, like
I don't care.
It makes me think about the Jim Carrey version of it when he did Ace Ventura. He's like, it wasn't me. It was the one-armed man. Like, this is the only time I think about it is I just hear the Jim Carrey speech. So
someone impersonated that. It was do you watch John Mulaney, any of his specials?
Yeah.
He does like a whole bit about how like at the end he goes in and Dr. Kimball in Chicago accosts the doctor who was the reason. It's like, you were the reason. Anyway, sorry.
So the story isn't, and then later you find out the story really isn't centered around Tenma at all. And most of the stories that you get that follow it are based on people who are seen, good or bad or indifferent, as humans. So you'll get the story of Ava. Follow her story. She's warm and friendly and is a nice person, but the way she was raised and hedonism always gets in the way. There's also a war criminal who cares for a child of a family he kills, and there's also a mafioso who's a terrible person, but then ends up...
Wait, is that the blind guy?
No. These are different people. You've not met these people.
Okay.
There's also like a mafioso who ends up being a terrible person, but he's also like extremely lonely and wishes for a better life for himself. So The title Monster is actually a misleading title because the show is not as simple as Johann is the monster, go get the monster.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically showing that monsters are made, but yet there's always a propensity for the monster to take over. And that is essentially the central thesis of the show, that there's no such thing as pure, true evil. In fact, you'll even find that if you look at the humanity of Johann, a lot of his choices were made for him. And what ended up turning him into a bad person were outside of his control. And so that is kind of like the central thesis of the show Monster, is that humans are humans, and if are given the opportunity, have a likelihood for badness, but they're more complex than the pure designation of evil. So yeah, I don't know if you had any thoughts.
There's no black and white, just shades of gray.
Right, and so that's what makes the show very good to me, is that it's about character development in the show more than anything. It's not flashy. There's no magic. There's no sex appeal. There's really, not a lot of, there's violence, but it's not shown a lot. It's a lot more implied than anything else. So really Monster is in itself about starting someone's arc, ending it, and finding out how the central two people fit into their story. So
I could absolutely see them adapting Monster into like a live action TV show.
And it's funny you said that, but keep going.
Because it's not anime in that there's no ramp ups. There's no battles with the bosses. It's just a legitimate crime thriller drama.
Right, exactly. And it's very, as you said, very muted. So a lot of the colors are brown, and a lot of things take place in the middle of the night, and everything's dark. And as you said, I can imagine you who naps during shows, that this was a pretty hard show to stay up for. But so here's the deal. So as we told you, the anime ran starting in 2002, but New Line Cinema acquired the rights for an American live-action film adaptation of Monster, and the guy who wrote History of Violence was hired to write the screenplay. But then they announced that it was going to come out in 2009, but then it fell into production limbo.
It died in production.
And then Guillermo del Toro wanted to get his hands on it in 2013, and he wanted to do it through HBO.
Right. Yes.
And they were working together on it to get the TV pilot out, and had a lot of people on it. It was actually like, it had a lot of like, I think John Cho was on it or something like that. Like there was a lot of like big name actors that were going to get into it. But then HBO passed on it, and he's still trying to get Monster out into the world, basically.
I would not want to see a film. I would want to see bare minimum, like even if you're going to shorten it down in order to get the essence of what you're trying to create, I'd want to see bare minimum like 8-hour-long episodes. And if you did that, fine. Does it deserve more than that? Sure. But at bare minimum, I think you would need that to at least feel the vibe that they're trying to create.
I think HBO should jump on this show. I think so.
Or Netflix.
Or Netflix. Yeah. And like, even if they redo it as an anime, I'm fine with that. But so another central thesis in the show, and we'll kind of touch into it in a second, is the storybook, which I will read at some point. But the one thing I wanted to give us some space to talk about is the music in this show. I think deserves a lot of space. We talk about theme songs, and they kind of like set the tone for a show. Let's talk about the intro, man. That just like bassy, just like it was so awesome. I love that one.
I enjoyed the intro far more than the outro.
I'm surprised by that, because as far as I know about you, Garrett, you like that, like new age, the new age singer, the In Excesses of the world
and stuff like that. But the
synth pop,
and you had me at the end of our last recording. You had me listen to it, and I just kept waiting for like the chorus or for there to be like a beat drop. And it just never comes, so I feel like the song doesn't have a payoff.
It's not. It's yeah. So David Sylvain, the writer of that song, is like very well known for these kind of like soundscape minimalism style songs. And he was in a new age band called Japan. I don't think that has anything to do with his selection as the guy who wrote the ending to Monster. But I love it because it really. The opening show sets the ominousness of the show. Like there's always a threat around the corner, and it's very thundery.
Right.
And then there's this like opera singing in the background, which is very like ominous and like almost hellion
Haunting.
Haunting, yes. And the theme song itself is unlike other theme songs that we've seen. It kind of looks like it's showing actual clips from the show. And I remember thinking this when I was watching it, that it kind of gives away a little bit of the story. Like, well, granted, they were giving away a little bit of like the twist that Johan.
Well, I kept trying to figure out who the guy running around was, and I didn't realize it was Tenma, but he had become more disheveled and like wrought over time. And
that's the crazy thing about it. Like, if you were watching the first 4 episodes, you're like, well, Tenma's a doctor, and he's going to stay doctor this whole show. But then you watch the theme song, and you're like, well, Tenma at some point has some real bad stuff happen to him.
Part of that also has to deal with the fact that because he's drawn... Look, so let's go back to the Fugitive thing. Right. If this was live action and Harrison Ford was playing Dr. Tenma, right? But then they showed the opening clips, you'd be like, oh, that's Harrison Ford. Mm-hmm. I can't always associate the drawn face and be like, that's the same person. Because for all I know, it's a totally different person.
Right.
Because I don't think that there's like the uniqueness of character the way that humans legitimately have between one another. Right. So sometimes, and this is not the first show where that's happened, where I've been like, oh, like there's like a big reveal and I'm like, who's that? Oh, I know them? Oh, I forgot. I didn't know them from looking at them.
And there's also a part where you see a little boy next to a window with like blood stains around it. And then you see the camera pan up to the kid, and the kid grows up and turns around. And you're like, okay, so obviously the young boy is the monster. Like, you done told me that in the first beginning of the show. So, and I was surprised you didn't like the ending. I like it a lot. But I also think that what was really crazy was that there's this storybook playing in the background. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what is this? Why am I looking at this weird like witch goblin looking thing throughout the whole story? And it's because there's a storybook that's read throughout the course of the show that kind of gives an idea to Johan's his motivations, why he does the stuff he does, in like kind of the central arc of the show. So if you will indulge me,
please,
I am going to read.
I encourage you to do so.
And I'm going to play some music, so it's going to sound really boring on your end.
All right.
But I'm sure I'll make it more ominous when I edit it. So here we go. This is A Nameless Monster is the name of the story. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there lived a nameless monster. The monster was dying to have a name, so he decided to set out on a journey to find his name. But the world was a large place, so the monster split into 2 on his journey. One monster went to the east, the other went to the west. The one monster who went to the east came to a village. He said, "Mr. Blacksmith, please give me your name." And the blacksmith said, "You can't give someone a name." The monster says, "If you give me your name, I'll jump into your stomach and make you strong in return." The blacksmith says, "Really? You'll make me stronger? Okay, you can have my name." And the monster went inside the blacksmith's stomach. The monster became Otto the blacksmith. Otto was the strongest man in town, but one day, look at me, the monster inside me has grown this large. Munch, munch, chomp, chomp, gobble, gobble, gulp. The hungry monster ate Otto from the inside. He went back to being a monster without a name. He jumped into the stomach of Hans the shoemaker, but munch, munch, chomp, chomp, gobble, gobble, gulp. He went back to being a monster without a name. He jumped to the stomach of Thomas the hunter, but munch, munch, chomp, chomp, gobble, gobble, gulp. And once again, he was a monster without a name. The monster went to a castle to look for a wonderful name, and he saw a little boy, and he said, "If you give me your name, I'll make you strong." The boy, being very sick, said, "If you heal my sickness, I'll give you my name." The monster jumped to the boy's stomach. The king was delighted. "The prince is well! The prince is well!" The monster liked the boy's name. He liked living in the castle, so even when he was hungry, he stayed put. Every day he was so hungry, but he stayed put. But one day he was just too hungry. Look at me, the monster inside me has grown this large," and said the boy. The boy ate the king and all of his servants. Munch, munch, chomp, chomp, gobble, gobble, gulp. One day the boy came upon the monster who had gone west, and he said, "I have a name. It's a wonderful name," said the boy. The monster who went west replied, "You don't need a name. You can be happy without a name, because we are nameless monsters." The boy ate the monster who went west. Even though he had finally found a name, there was no one left to call him by it. But what a wonderful name it was, Johan. And that was A Nameless Monster. So let's parcel that a little bit. It's the idea, I think it's a really interesting way of looking at the story, because the parable in the show is that there's a lot of reasons why people want to be known and to loved and to be acknowledged and to become strong and powerful and rich. But ultimately, it comes at a cost of sacrificing yourself and others to get there sometimes. And ultimately, even and in the process of making something of yourself, for making a case, you're still a nameless monster. You're still alone. So the idea of being lonely, still after gaining power, hurting people to get there, it never really makes sense. So Johan is this insatiable beast that wants to keep hurting for this very severe case of being loved by his sister, acknowledged by Dr. Tenma, and he never gets there because he's a monster, and monsters don't get names. Monsters don't get that kind of stuff before. So I don't know. What did you think? I feel like I've said a lot, but
I think it's spooky as all get out.
And
it kind of, as you were reading, it kind of reminded me of the tales of Beetle the Bard and the Deathly Hallows from Harry Potter. Sort of this like life lesson that's encompassed within a children's story. You know, teaching them about human behavior and how you should be, and you know, the characters just choosing a very, very dark path. But it was munch, munch, gulp, gulp. Very, very cool.
Very, very creepy. And another person that I thought about when I was thinking about the story and thinking about the themes of the show is Michael Jackson. And bear with me here. This is a part where we're going to kind of go a little bit off the edge because now we're going into the deeper themes of the show, is the idea of what you sacrifice for the sake of elevation, acknowledgement. Michael Jackson, for all intents and purposes, really just wanted to be loved, get his childhood back, and unsuffer the abuse that he received.
Right.
But at what cost? At the end of the day, he lost his name. He lost his fame. He lost everything that made his art great because he let the monster out, in my mind. I don't know. And that's something I thought about. I don't know, because one song that I like to do when I think that I want to listen to Michael Jackson is listen to the song
Man in the Mirror.
Well, that's definitely, that was a little bit too on the nose for me. But one song that I think about is this really good song that not a lot of people listen to called Stranger in Moscow. It's one of his later songs, and it's a song about just being lonely, just like walking alone, being alone, no matter how much, you know, people constantly are looking at you, but you feel lonely. And it's my favorite song of his. But then at the end of the song, you'll hear this sample of this kid going, "Michael," very excitedly at him. And that's when I say, "Fuck this guy," and I turn the song off. And that's the exercise I play every time I want to listen to Michael Jackson. And that is because that's the thing. It's the whole point of the show. It's kind of like the message I took from it. I don't know. What were some things that you rolled with when thinking about it?
No, I think that's an excellent analogy.
Right.
In terms of, you know, there was a lot of good in there, but there was also a lot of darkness. And it's, you know, again, I know that we reference a lot of the same things.
Right.
But when you go back to like Harry Potter and you say that we are both light and dark, it's the choices that we make that define us.
Right.
And so clearly Johan is making some very bad choices.
Yes. And he was made. That's another thing about that. Monsters are made, and they're allowed to be made. And that's really what the point of
now,
the show.
That being said, his sister, if you go back 9 years to when the incident occurred and he was shot, his sister doesn't want to see him.
Well, she forgets all about it. She forgets about it.
We don't know that he didn't commit that crime. At least not through 6 episodes.
And that's the thing. That's the thing about the there's a word for it. It's like a Don Quixote. It's the narrator you can't trust, basically. And so, like, the question is, maybe Tenma did do it? You know, maybe Tenma is just chasing a ghost and all these things. I wouldn't be shocked if this was a Fight Club situation, and you know, he's Brad Pitt at the end of the movie. But that's kind of like another thing that the show tries to make you think is like, is Tenma the actual monster in the show? So that's like another thing. Is Johan real? Is he the actual character like that did all this stuff? Like it's an interesting show. It's a lot in character development, but it takes a long time to get there.
Have you seen all 70 episodes?
I have, and I got to the ending of the show, and it was...
Is all revealed?
All's revealed, but the place gets some very gnarly places. So one thing you learn is that Johan uh, had loved his sister so much that he wanted to be her, so he dressed like her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would look like he dressed like a girl. He'd have long hair, and at some point, someone tried to take one. He goes, try to take the kids,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, "I'll give you. You just have to choose one. I will kidnap one of your kids." And Johan, still looking like his sister with long hair, his mother pulls one hand, but then gives the other hand, and he goes, "I look so much like my sister. I didn't know if she was talking about me or if she gave me away. What was her decision?" And it was that idea of like, you messed up. A, you messed up as a parent, but B, what was the real question? Like, what is the answer? What was I the one that was supposed to be given away and all that stuff? And after that, he's like brainwashed into becoming the next Hitler. It's like a crazy show.
Right.
And so, and you get a lot of answers and like what the role is. And so it's a really great show. I think, for me, it's worth it for a week. But for the question, I guess, to end with it for you is, it's a really long story and you haven't really gotten to the meat of the story yet. So is there enough in 4 to 6 episodes for a new fan to latch on before we get
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you enjoy mystery and you enjoy cliffhangers and you want that big payoff, now that you know that there is going to be a payoff, absolutely. There's tons of meat to chew on here.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't like, were you disappointed that the show took a different direction after episode 4? Because I feel like it could have kept going at the pace it was after episode 4, but then it like died down, and then it was like time skip, and now we're trying to figure out the story all over again. Did you lose you there? Because
it's fine. I just thought they were building layers. If I ended up getting 20 episodes in and there's like multiple time skips and they don't seem to make any sense, I mean, like, because you can only hold on for so long. Your suspension of disbelief and your willingness to let someone string you along will only take you so far without getting what you want. So it would all depend on what I got as the episodes went on. But in terms of like through the first 6, would I give it at least up to 10? Absolutely. And then at getting it 10, would that be enough to get me to 20? I don't know. But my guess is that it would be.
And this is the Weeb conundrum, right? For me, I want to recommend to people stuff that is not going to overwhelm them with the anime-ness of it. Like, I wouldn't give someone Monster Musume to start unless I'm doing a podcast with them, i.e. you. So, but Monster isn't really indicative of what anime as a medium is all about. And it's also really long. And it's also not like as gripping as some other stuff can be because of its length. So not too many weebs like myself would recommend Monster as their first thing, albeit for themselves, they value it very highly.
Right.
And so that is the conundrum. What is the right amount of realism to anime-ness that you want to give someone so that they enjoy? That's why I always like give people like Death Note to start because of that fact. Like, Yagami Light is a much more easily to understand, much more digestible version of Johan. Right? We'll talk about Death Note at some point. This is obviously a show we're going to be talking about over the time, but that to me, I think, becomes the big thing. Is like, I start with Death Note, but if people really like this thing and they really want to see the range and the spectrum that happens, Monster is definitely up there. And it's very highly ranked by all the websites, and everybody who gives a list of like top, anime out there, Monster is usually at the top of the list because of that. So what we're going to do is what we always do, which is called the Weeb and Noob score. The Weeb and Noob score doesn't decide whether or not it's good or not. It basically states what priority you should take. How soon should you watch it? Is it hard to get into? It's basically like a high number for a weeb is like, it's quintessential watch, get to it. It's easy to watch. You'll love it, blah, blah, blah. A high score for a noob is like, it was easy to pick up. I enjoyed it and it wasn't too hard for me to get into. A low score is just, it was all right. You can always find something else that hits this niche. And I'll start with this week. And I give this my weeb score of 9, and I will say this because it's a very, very good story. It's very understandable if you are a weeb because weebs already dedicate time to the idea of media. So I don't think it's like a hard thing for people to stomach. It's not like saying like watch One Piece, but get through 1,000 episodes before you get it. Like, it's still understandably, digestible. But I'm going to ding it because it's dark. There's not a lot of music. Like, the stuff that I like about anime, is I do like the bright, sunny blue skies and the colors and the high characters.
It's definitely a certain vibe.
It has a very muted sense of self. So I give it a high score as substance, but style can be a little bit harder to get into. So what do you give it as your noob score?
Well, I also would give it a 9. Right. I think this totally blows out of the water what people's perception of what anime might have to be, because don't get me wrong, there's obviously room in this world for Dragon Ball Z, but I think that what Monster does is that without any tricks and without anything crazy, it expands what the medium can be, and it does it exceptionally well. And so that's why I would give it a 9.
And I also would say that like a lot of pulp fiction anime, that like the kind of Dick Tracy style of anime existed out there, and Monster was kind of at the end of that, the whole like Detective Comics style of anime. And I think it's worth it to get at least a little bit of a history lesson on that style. So great property, a lot of substance to it, but it's long, and if you don't like a slow-paced show, if you want immediate gratification, it might not be for you. Not for you, definitely not. So, but mystery serial killers, what's wrong with that? So,
yeah, I mean, a lot of girls out there who love watching serial killer Netflix shows. This might be your.
And Johan is just as cute. He's a cutie guy. You know how all those girls who was excited about Richard
with the body.
It's people love Richard Ramirez because he was a good-looking guy to a lot of the women. I don't get it, but like for women who are really attracted to him. If people find Richard Ramirez attractive, Johan Liebert is for you. He's a BT. So while it is important to dive deeper into the ethos of what's true evil, it's always just important to hear your thoughts. Did you dive into Monster just like we did? Did you like it for its character development and its storyline, its themes? Or did you find it was just too dark, too dull, too slow-paced for you to get into? Let us know in the comments below, because we really want to keep the conversation going, especially for a show as well-reviewed as this one. If you want, you can always keep the conversation going on our social media, at Twitter, at Weeb_Noob, as well as on Instagram, at Wanwa Podcast. That's WANWA Podcast. You can also follow us on anchor.fm/Wanwa Podcast to get all your podcasts. But make sure you give us a 5-star review. It'll help people see our show, and we really thank you. It helps little smaller shows like ours get off the ground. But as we end and let Johan go on his killing spree, what are your final thoughts, Garrett, on the show Monster?
Just a little public service announcement to everyone out there. If you receive a random email from someone that says that they were born to bury you in flowers, do not look forward to meeting that person.
Yeah. So we're going to be breaking open our comatose kids' candies. We're going to be shooting dudes in the forehead. Also going to be running as fugitives. All in all, to wish you all fantastic. See you next week.
Take care, y'all.
Said to me just before he died that we had, oh my God, that we had been